We've arrived at chapter 13 in the book of Mark, and this is the chapter that I was nervous about. Way back in December when I laid out this series, I was nervous because I knew I couldn't skip this chapter. Verse 30 in this chapter has been really tough on my faith. Let's just read Mark 13, 1 to 31, and then I'll explain why this has been such a hard chapter for me. As he was going out of the temple, one of his disciples said to him, "Teacher, look, what massive stones, what impressive buildings." Jesus said to him, "Do you see these great buildings? Not one stone will be left upon another. All will be thrown down." While he was sitting on the Mount of Olives across from the temple, Peter, James, and John asked him privately, "Tell us, when will these things happen? What will be the sign when all these things are about to be accomplished?" Jesus told them, "Watch out that no one deceives you. Many will come in my name saying, 'I am he,' and they'll deceive many. When you hear of wars and rumors of wars, don't be alarmed. These things must take place, but it is not yet the end. For nation will rise up against nation and kingdom against kingdom. There'll be earthquakes in various places and famines. These are the beginnings of birth pains. But you, be on your guard. They'll hand you over to local courts and you'll be flogged in the synagogues. You will stand before governors and kings because of me as a witness to them. And it is necessary that the gospel be preached to all nations. So when they arrest you and hand you over, don't be worried beforehand what you'll say, but say whatever is given to you at that moment. For it isn't you speaking, but the Holy Spirit. Brother will betray brother to death, and a father his children. Children will rise up against their parents and have them put to death. You'll be hated by everyone because of my name, but the one who endures to the end will be saved. When you see the abomination of desolation standing where it should not be, let the reader understand. Then those in Judea must flee to the mountains. A man on the housetop must not come down or go in to get anything of his house, and a man in the field must not go back to get his coat. Woe to the pregnant women and nursing mothers in those days. Pray that it won't happen in winter. For those will be days of tribulation, the kind that hasn't been from the beginning of creation until now and never will be again. If the Lord had not cut short those days, no one would be saved. But he cut those days short for the sake of the elect whom he chose. Then, if anyone tells you, 'See, here's the Messiah,' 'See, there,' don't believe it. For false messiahs and false prophets will arise and will perform signs and wonders to lead astray, if possible, even the elect. And you must watch. I've told you everything in advance. But in those days, after that tribulation, the sun will be darkened and the moon will not shed its light. The stars will be falling from the sky and the powers in the heavens will be shaken. Then they will see the Son of Man coming in clouds with great power and glory. He will send out the angels and gather his elect from the four winds, from the ends of the earth to the ends of heaven. Learn this lesson from the fig tree. As soon as its branch becomes tender and sprouts leaves, you know that summer is near. In the same way, when you see these things happening, recognize that he is near, at the door. And here are the verses that were the kicker for me. Verse 30, "But truly I tell you, this generation will certainly not pass away until all these things take place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will never pass away." Here's the trouble for me. It sounds like much of what Jesus was talking about in this chapter was the siege and destruction that happened to Jerusalem in 70 AD. Much of it. But not all of it came to pass, even though Jesus said it would. Did you catch that? Verse 30, "Truly I tell you, this generation will not pass away until all these things take place." And I had read many commentaries over the year that had pointed out things like, well, the word generation there can mean race of people, but that didn't make any sense. What kind of prophecy is that? Like mankind won't disappear from the earth before the end of the earth. That didn't make that sense to me, at least. And so I was really struggling with this. Are the predictions trustworthy? Well, yeah, I believe they're trustworthy. Why? Because I believe that Jesus is trustworthy, right? But I couldn't understand the predictions because, like I said, it seemed like much of this passage seem to be talking about the destruction of Jerusalem that happened in 70 AD, the whole thing with what took place there at the temple. But then there were other parts that talked about this tribulation and the stars falling from the sky and all, and that hasn't happened yet. That sounded like what I read in Revelation about the great tribulation that I believe is yet to come. So I was left with this nagging question: what do I do with this? Because it sounds like Jesus is saying this, but it also seems like it's that, and I don't know what to do with this, but I want to trust Jesus, and I want to trust the predictions. But maybe the problem isn't Jesus, maybe it's me, maybe I can't trust myself, I can't trust the commentators to accurately interpret the prophecies, and if I got that wrong, what else have I misunderstood or got wrong about my faith? And so as a result, I was always extremely uncomfortable when I got to chapters like this one. And I avoided these passages if I could because of all the cognitive dissonance that it created in me, all the doubts and the questions and the struggle that I just didn't want to face. And this was all still unresolved in me when I planned this series last December. I felt God was prodding me, Andy, you need to finish the book of Mark. But I knew this chapter was coming. Friends, I am no longer anxious. I'm excited to share with you what I have learned in my preparation for our time together today. So let's get into it, right? So the chapter begins with disciples pointing out to Jesus, look at how awesome this place is. Look at the stones, and it's just huge and amazing and awe-inspiring. And Jesus says to them, do you see this great building? This is verse 2. And not one stone will be left on another. All will be thrown down. It had to be mind-blowing for these disciples. And so they asked him, Jesus, tell us when these things will happen, and what will be the sign when these things are about to be accomplished? Like, when is it going to happen, and what's the warning signs? Matthew, when he records this incident, he says, while he was sitting on the Mount of Olives, the disciples approached him privately and said, tell us when will these things happen, and what is the sign of your coming and the end of the age? I point that out because Matthew seems to distinguish between two separate things, right? When these things are going to happen, and then the signs of Jesus' return and the end of the age seems to separate those two. The disciples probably thought, no, this is just one progression of events. Like the destruction of the temple has to be the end of the age, right? It's got to be. I mean, that's just like disaster, and it can't get worse than that. We're left to ponder Jesus' purpose in answering their questions. And what's Mark's purpose in telling us, right? What was Jesus doing by answering their questions? Was he satisfying their curiosity, or is there something more? And why did Mark choose to include this in his rendering of Jesus' life and events? So here's what we're going to do. We're going to spend just a few minutes talking about interpreting and using apocalyptic literature. I know this is a topic you're all dying to learn about today. Like, right? You woke up this morning and go, man, I sure hope that when I tune in, to Panama Baptist Online, I get to learn about how to interpret and use apocalyptic literature, because I'm pretty sure this is the piece I've been missing. Oh, okay, LOL. But I really think you'll love what we uncover together today. So stick with me. We're going to get deep for a little bit so that we can grab what Jesus has for us, and I promise you that will be worth your while. So let's talk about this topic, interpreting and using apocalyptic literature. Our Western mindset, when we hear a prophecy about something that's going to happen, we expect a linear timeline. Right? This is going to happen, then that's going to happen, then that's right after that. And when we are hearing prophecy, we want somebody to tell us what's going to happen and in what order and when, right? And you probably listen to that and going, well, duh, yeah, right? That's our mindset. Tell me what's going to happen, in what order and when, and stick to the facts, okay? Because leave it to me to figure out whether or not I think your warning is relevant to me or not, and what my response should be. So I don't need you to do that part. You just tell me what's going to happen when and in what order. I thought about a time when this happened. If you're old enough, you'll remember Y2K. Right? They said, okay, so here's what's going to happen at the stroke of midnight. All the computers, everything's going to shut down because of this programming error. They hadn't thought through ahead of time. So we're probably going to lose power, and the telephone lines aren't going to work, and there might be, supply shortages, and all this stuff's going to happen. So they told you what, they told you when, they told you some things you could do about it, but it was up to you to decide what you were going to do. and whether you thought it was relevant. And there was the full range in America, wasn't there, right? There's everybody from those who are like, yeah, who cares? They'll get it figured out by then, to people like my mom, who stocked up for months. There was food, and then we had buckets of water that all saved up in case, the electric was off and stuff. I was somewhere kind of in the middle. I did have some water. I had some things on the shelves and a few other things. I wasn't too worried about the hoarders and that kind of stuff. And on the night of Y2K, I had my friends Richard and Cindy Colsey over. We were playing games, and we stayed up to midnight. We just wanted to see what would happen. And just after midnight, I went over and picked up the receiver on the phone on our landline to see, oh, yep, we still got phone, still got lights. Okay, I guess we're good, right? But that's how we expect a prophecy, a prediction to be given to us. Jesus' audience was used to prophetic and apocalyptic literature of a different format. To be sure, the prophecies that they got described real people, real places, real events, but it could have some symbolism and figurative stuff in there. But it wasn't limited to a strict linear timeline. For example, pauses could be left out of the description. So it could be, this is going to happen, and then this is going to happen, but they leave out like 500 years of history in the middle. There's a reason for all that. A double fulfillment was possible, where it's going to happen, but then it's going to happen to somebody else later. For example, there's stuff in the Psalms that was about people who were alive at the time, but it also was a prophecy of something that happened in Jesus' life, right? Double fulfillment. That's what I mean by that. Even a merging of events was possible. Now, to us, that seems like really, really odd and maybe inaccurate. So what in the world is going on here, right? Well, I've come to really appreciate this method of prophetic and apocalyptic literature because there's something really beautiful about it. Actually, three things. First, it keeps the focus on the forest instead of the trees. Like the big idea of the prophecy rather than every single detail. In our Western culture, when we get any kind of prophecy, or like when we read the book of Revelation, we want to go through and we want to map out every single detail to an event, either past or current or potentially future, right? So this is this, the 10 horns is the European Union, everybody, right? The prophecy in the format they were used to doesn't do that. It keeps the focus on the big idea rather than the details. Number two, this is beautiful. It provides information plus hope that's relevant in every age while simultaneously giving insight into future events. I'm going to illustrate that in a little bit. And then number three, it fosters confidence through fulfilled prophecies. So it's a beautiful way of doing it. This is what you really got to know. The purpose of apocalyptic literature is to do two things. Number one, convey the big idea, whatever it is. God's in control, or blessing or judgment is coming. As you think about Isaiah's prophecies, right? There's a big idea you got to know. God is still in control. It doesn't matter how bad the world looks, Daniel, right? Daniel's prophecies, you see that. Or it doesn't matter how comfortable you are right now, Israel, in Isaiah's prophecy, judgment is coming. Or it doesn't matter how far you feel like you've been separated from God's grace, exiles in Babylon, blessing and restoration is coming. So the purpose was to convey a big idea. And then number two, to cause a reaction. Repentance, hope, something like that. So when Jesus answers the question that the disciples asked that day, he's not simply trying to satisfy their curiosity so that they'll know whether or not they need to be concerned or not. Tell us what's going to happen. Oh, 40 years from now? I'm not worried, right? He's not trying to do that for them, nor is he trying to be vague and confusing, like, let me give you a little of this, and a little of that, and a little stuff, and so you can't figure it out. This passage, friends, is a gift to every generation from the disciples to the generation that'll be on the earth when Jesus returns. And I hope you'll see that in our time together. So, the key to interpreting and using what Jesus said is to do two things. One, look for the big idea, and two, the intended reaction, rather than trying to match up all the events with every prophetic detail. All right, that said, we're ready. As you read through Mark 13, you have four basic options for how you're going to interpret it. And there have been Jesus followers and theologians even throughout the years who've picked every one of these four options. Option A is to say this passage describes only the fall of Jerusalem that took place in 70 AD. So you take every detail in there, every line that Jesus said, and you try to figure out how it matches up. Option B, you say, no, this passage describes only the events that are preceding the second coming of Jesus and the end of this age. So it wasn't about that, it's about the end of the age yet to come. Option C is to say it describes some of each in a linear or repetitive form. So linear form, like the first half of Mark 13 is about the fall of Jerusalem, and the second half is about the Great Tribulation and Jesus' return that's described like in Revelation. Or others have gone, so, well, it goes back and forth. So it's fall of Jerusalem for a little bit, and then the end of the age, and then back to Jerusalem a bit, and then back to the end of the age. That's what I mean, like some sort of repetitive format. This, then that, then this, then that, then this, and that. Or option D, it describes some of each, the fall of Jerusalem and the end of the age, in kind of a merging pattern. Puts some of it together, some of it separate, some together, so that it'll always be relevant. Here's where I am. After much prayer and research, I hold option D. And for the sake of time, I'm not going to attempt to defend my position, nor am I going to attempt to discredit the others, because here's what I really feel like that God wants me to do in our short time together. I want to focus on the big idea and the response that Jesus exhorts us to have. So those are the two big questions. What's the big idea that Jesus conveyed in Mark 13? What lesson is there for us? And then second question, what reaction does Jesus want us to have to this prophecy? Here we go. Big idea or big lesson. Number one, you can't reject God's Son and get away with it. What Jesus prophesied by cursing the fig tree we talked about in part 2 of this series, that occurred. That occurred. Israel lost its right to represent God to the world, and the temple system was destroyed when Jerusalem was destroyed. I want to show you a little bit. This is from a PowerPoint in Logos called Not One Stone Left Upon Another. It's nothing of my own creation. And I'm not going to talk through all of it, but just little clips. In 66 AD, insurgent elements of the population in Judea and Galilee revolted against the Roman authorities. They said, we had enough, and they revolted. That revolt ended in disaster for the Jewish people. Jerusalem was besieged and eventually destroyed. Many of those who survived that destruction spent the rest of their lives in captivity. The Arch of Titus, which interestingly enough I've seen is there in Rome, proclaims a story of Titus's victory over Judea and the brutal recapture of Judea. On the arch, on the other side, you can see the carrying off of the temple's holy items. There's the golden candlestick, you can see it there, the table of showbread, the trumpets, and there's some Jewish captives standing over there in the corner on the relief of this arch. When the Romans breached the walls, they besieged Jerusalem. When they breached the walls, they slaughtered its inhabitants, and they set the temple on fire, burning it and those who were in it. Soldiers took prisoners of war and forced them to throw down the massive columns and stones from the temple area into the street below. Archaeologists have left some of these piles for us to see. It is indeed no two stones were left on top of each other up on this beautiful Temple Mount. It took place exactly as Jesus predicted. After the siege of Jerusalem, more brutalities followed, including the famous siege of Masada. And for decades after 70 AD, Jews were not allowed to permitted to enter Jerusalem. Just devastating to them, right? Here they were fighting for their city, believing Jerusalem is holy and we need to kick out the foreigners, and they are the ones that get kicked out in the end, are not allowed to return for decades. The final insult to the Jewish people was a levying of war reparations. They were forced to pay for the costs of the battle that destroyed them. Those war reparations, though, weren't used to pay that back. Instead, the Romans used the war reparations to fund the building of a temple to the gods Jupiter, Juno, and Minerva in Rome. You can't get away with rejecting the Son of God. Interestingly enough, all this happened in the lifetime of this generation, exactly as Jesus said, and what I had read for years and struggled over there in verse 30 and 31. Lesson 1. Lesson 2. Jesus will return. And when he returns, there'll be a reckoning, right? So, you can't get away with rejecting Jesus, and Jesus will return. These are the big ideas that Jesus was teaching to his disciples. Sprinkled in there is some other stuff that they needed to know, that time, like for example, their time was going to be really tough. Persecution was coming. But Jesus is coming. That's what he wanted them to know. So, quick aside. I want to talk about relevance. Because one of the things I said that makes this type of prediction in apocalyptic literature so beautiful is, instead of it only being relevant for the generation in which the thing is fulfilled, the prophecies are relevant in generation after generation after generation, age after age. That's the case here. This prophetic word has been relevant ever since Jesus uttered it. And it will be relevant until the end of the age when Jesus comes again. Prior to the destruction of Jerusalem, it was a relevant message. Guys, you need to be prepared for the coming judgment. You don't know when it's coming, but it is definitely coming. It could happen with little or no warning, but here are some signs. Since the destruction of Jerusalem, it is equally relevant. It has been, right, for 100 AD, 200 AD, 300 AD, 2024 AD. Be prepared for the coming judgment. Jesus is coming back. You don't know when it's coming, but he is definitely coming, and there will be a reckoning, and it could happen with little or no warning, but here are some signs. I love that. So, talked about the big idea. What is the expected response? What is Jesus hoping is going to happen by telling this to us? Not just that we can go, oh wow, that's interesting. Verse 32. Now concerning that day or hour, no one knows. Neither the angels in heaven nor the Son, but only the Father. Watch. Be alert, for you don't know when the time is coming. It's like a man on a journey who left his house, gave authority to his servants, gave each one his work, and commanded the doorkeepers to be alert. Therefore, be alert, since you don't know when the master of the house is coming, whether in the evening or at midnight or crowing of the rooster early in the morning. Otherwise, when he comes suddenly, he might find you sleeping. And what I say to you, I say to everyone, be alert. The intended reaction here is to stay awake and be watching. As you see in the NIV and the ESV, they really hit on that. The CSB talked about be alert. The NIV, ESV, stay awake, be watchful. Jesus' intended reaction is we're not going to just hear this and go, oh wow, that's coming. I hope it's not in my lifetime, or I hope it is in my lifetime, or even, wow, that's coming. Let me see if I can predict whether it's going to be this week or next week. Right? No. He wants us to be watchful. So what does watchfulness look like if it isn't matching current events with prophetic details? 3 things. Alert, prepared, anticipating. Alert. Like we're alert, right? We're not sleeping. We're focused. We're alert. We're on guard duty, if you will. We're recognizing and looking and waiting. We are prepared. We're ready for him to come back. We've made the decisions and we've made the lifestyle that we need to have, right? We are prepared and we are anticipating. We're anxious for him to return. We're looking forward to his return. That's what watchfulness looks like. Now, I get it. This is hard. It's hard to stay awake and focused. Jesus acknowledged that in other parts of the Gospels. Theologians have a term for what it is we believe is happening here. They call it the imminency of Christ. It just means that Jesus could come back at any moment. And then that, with his return, that reckoning and everything that comes with it and after it is immediately set into motion. It could happen anytime. The stage is set. The stuff is there. It could happen at any time. I get it. I get it. It's tough to stay awake. It's tough to stay focused, and be like, okay, I'm going to live today as if this is the last day, because it very well may be the last day, because Jesus could come at any time. I also get it because the imminency of Christ it's a little harder to take seriously than perhaps it was for Mark or for Peter or for Paul, because a lot of time has gone by. A lot of water has gone under the bridge since then, right? And Paul and Peter and John thought it was coming very soon. And parts of it were. But parts of it weren't. So to some degree, it looks like they were wrong, right? Paul says, it's coming very soon, right? Was he wrong? So it's hard. It's hard for us to get worked up about it when so much time has gone by, and we don't know how much more time is going to go by, but it's been generations. And maybe your baggage, you have a little baggage with this, kind of like I do. When I was a kid, the church I attended was really into this kind of stuff. And so we had these prophecy conferences, and they'd make a big deal about saying, well, we don't know the day or the hour, but we're pretty sure it's definitely before 1984. And I remember very clearly one guy, saying is definitely, absolutely before, and this is how I know. And my parents were into this. They're devout followers of Jesus Christ. But so they were like, Andy, I remember a conversation where we were talking on the way home from a grad party, and I was talking about what I wanted to have at my graduation party from high school. And they said to me, you're not going to need to worry about that, because there's no way Jesus won't be back before 1987. Yeah, that's when I graduated from high school. So what do we do with this? Jesus says, be alert. Stay focused. Stay awake. What do we do with this? Let me end this way. The end is coming soon. The end is coming soon. Whether it's Jesus' return or your last breath, even if you're a teen and you're hearing me, you've got years if Jesus delays in coming back. You got years. But compared to eternity, like compared to forever, it's soon. And for those who are listening to me who are, my age or older, you're very much aware that my last breath and your last breath, that's not necessarily guaranteed to be that far out. So the end is coming soon, whether it's Jesus' return or your last breath. Hear this: Jesus wants you to live with hope. That no matter how bad it gets, no matter how ugly it gets, no matter how hard it gets to be a Jesus follower, you have hope, because Jesus is coming back. And all the injustice that's done against Jesus and against Jesus' followers is going to be dealt with. You can't reject Jesus, whether it's Jesus himself or the message through Jesus' followers. You can't reject that and get away with it. Jesus wants you, friend, to live with hope. Jesus wants you to live with intentionality. Not sleepwalking through your days here on earth. And Jesus wants you to live with intensity until the end. Whether the end is Jesus returning or the end is your last breath. Why? Because the end isn't the end. What Jesus knows and the Bible teaches is that the end isn't the end. There's a life after this life. There's a reckoning after this life. And for those who were alert and prepared and anticipating in this life, incredible things happen in the next. And for those who are not alert, prepared, or anticipating in this life, terrible things happen in the next. So Jesus wants you to live with hope and intentionality and intensity until the end, because the end isn't the end. Amen. We'll pick up in chapter 14 when we get together next time.